Welcome back. When we last left off, I had just begun the process of integrating all of the new technology that my Thaumcraft expansion had unlocked. While we have made excellent progress on the Sapphire problem thus far, there is still plenty of waiting to do, and as such, I will be spending most of this episode focusing on further diversification, automation, and modernization of my technology base. The first step to this process is bees. I've been somewhat neglecting them as an option for quite some time now, and that is going to need to change at some point. As with most of the early game technology, I get started by exploiting the power of the testificate economy for my personal benefit. Some things truly never change. But I do come out of it with apiaries and frames at essentially no cost to myself, so I am content in this world state. Bees can be purchased by using coins that I earn from following the bee quest progression lines. Bees aren't really gated by much of anything, and were available since the Steam age, so thankfully those quests aren't locked behind my sulfur ore problem. I can then use the coins I get from the first quest, which is making a scoop, to buy 2 hives that I break to get bees to progress further. Bee breeding quest bags come in 3 flavors, so my first step is to decide how I should open them and if I should upgrade them first. I also grabbed these screenshots in my game world because when I was filming this I didn't feel like switching, so don't worry, I voided them after checking. The first bag, Basic Bees, has literally nothing that I care about. I can make, buy, or otherwise produce everything I want from here with enough patience and time, rendering the loot bag largely pointless. Advanced Bees is pay dirt. It has hives, special drones, and oblivion frames in its drop pool, and I am very much interested in getting more of all of those. A single oblivion frame early on will save me literal days worth of bee breeding time. Expert Bees is, paradoxically, almost completely useless. All of its stuff is apiary parts and equipment for machines that we can't make, power, or use at the moment. And it's not even a complete machine, it's just one part of it, rendering it largely pointless even if we could use those machines. I should also mention some things regarding my starting hive selections. Forestry princesses can be of 2 stocks, either ignoble or pristine. Normally when breeding, queens will produce 1 princess and 1 or more drones depending on their genetic line, which you would then use to breed the next generation of queens. Ignoble queens have a small chance of not producing a princess every time they reproduce after the first 100 generations, so as much as possible we want to avoid getting those or relying on them for anything. Hives have a random chance of dropping either an ignoble or pristine princess, and there is nothing you can do about it. Except purchase Rocky or Ender hives instead, which have a 100% chance of dropping a pristine princess, because why would anyone want to implement a mechanic consistently? Since I need access drones to trade with villagers, I'm required to purchase another hive type, so I select one that gives me forest bees. They're the only starting species that I can breed right now that produces more than 2 drones, which will then make mutation and drone production easier down the line. The hives also have a chance of not dropping a drone when broken, and you only get 2 chances of getting a drone before you are soft-locked out of bees forever. I hope you're feeling lucky. After throwing the forestry bees together in an apiary with some frames, I get to work on progressing my quest lines. For those of you unfamiliar with how forestry bee breeding works, they offer basically just stat upgrades or downgrades that you can mix and match depending on what you want to do with your bees. For the most part, I just want my bees to die fast and mutate more, so I will choose frames that encourage those properties and sacrifice production speed in the process. A weird thing happened when I loaded the world, by the way. Some of the glass microblocks that I had around my crucible to keep it from leaking turned into bloodrune microblocks instead. I have literally no idea how this happened. This is why we make backups, folks, because modded Minecraft is just janky like that sometimes. Fun fact about bees, number 1. Rain, in addition to killing my power production, also stops most bees from working at all. Good times. After progressing as far along the bee quest line as I can, I get started with early crossbreeding. My goal right now is to just assemble a basic breeding stock, something with a short lifespan that is environmentally tolerant, produces a lot of drones, and is not particularly prone to mutating with anything. Basically, it's just a template to isolate traits I care about down the line. That is going to require, at a minimum, getting myself majestic bees for their 4 drone production trait, which is several species deep. Like most breeding projects in this game, this is going to be a very long, drawn-out, slow, and not at all YouTube-friendly process, so I'm just going to take the same approach with bees as I did with industrial craft crossbreeding, and only bother sharing the highlights as they come up. As mentioned in the previous episode, it's about time that I start to upgrade my base. The first step in that process is stopping the stupid ender creepers from teleporting all over it. I am sick and tired of these things being everywhere. This involves going up and replacing a fair bit of the mob farm with obsidian. It should be blast-proof enough to keep the build intact without having to worry about water throwing creepers everywhere. It's starting to get a little smoggy out here. I wonder why. Anyway, my bees at this point have produced enough combs that I feel it worth my time to start making amber for lamps. Simply put, I want my base modernized yesterday, and this is an excellent start. The process will first require a bunch of spruce saplings, which is a problem I solve by throwing hands with a bunch of spruce trees and then melting their babies down into lumps of gray goo. Also on the shopping list are 2 enchantment tables, one for the Osmotic Enchanter and one for the Overchanter. The Overchanter is completed in short order, making this thing nets me a considerable amount of research points in the progress, by the way. Between its crafting components and the value of the table itself, this thing produces almost 300 primal aspect points of research alone. And right after that comes the Osmotic Enchanter. It's important to note that I can't actually use this yet. It considers iron-capped wands to be too rustic, apparently, so I will need to make myself a gold-capped wand of some kind to funnel this into the system. This is actually a restriction added by the base mod, and is not something created or enforced by the Gregtech New Horizons team. So it makes even less sense than you would expect otherwise, because who in their right mind would be able to make and use this thing in otherwise unmodified base game Thaumcraft, but still not have an upgraded wand? Self-defeating tech gating aside, I want some better frames. The best way to reduce bee lifespan and increase mutation chance is currently with 3 soul frames. I make 12, so I have enough for 4 apiaries, which in theory should mean 4 different species rolling for crossbreeds at once. I know, shooting high. These frames can also be repaired by the Osmotic Enchanter, which is a convenience factor I never knew I needed until I figured it out just a few moments ago. My next project is a thermostatic harness and girdle. When combined with the power of enchantments and fueled with potentia, they serve as an excellent, cheap, and renewable source of flight. Naturally, I immediately put them on and go take a look at my base. This is something I could have done in creative mode, I guess, but it never really occurred to me until now. It is surprisingly relaxing, just looking at how far I have come from a scant few blocks of corpse dirt 8 episodes ago. The next project is my arcane lamps. Torches begone. I have a superior solution now. And with these powers combined, I can get started on another project that has been a long time coming. I'm going to eventually do a rolling phase out of all of my old stuff into a new chunk-respecting base design, but right now my priority is just constructing a flat, lit, and covered working area that won't spawn all sorts of nasty monsters. By combining the power of chiseled cobblestone, which mobs aren't supposed to be able to spawn on, arcane lamps, for creating light that mobs shouldn't be able to spawn in, and chandeliers, which are supposed to block mob spawns, I finally get an area that will mostly keep mobs from spawning under normal circumstances. Am I salty about my villagers dying? No, not at all. Why on earth would you think that? Want to hear what I am salty about, though? Terrible documentation. That's what. The chandelier's description reads, "It will prevent mobs from spawning within 16 blocks regardless of whether there is clear line of sight." The arcane lamp has a similar description reading, "Additional sources of light may appear up to 16 blocks away." What the ever-loving heck does 16 blocks mean? Is it 16 blocks of cardinal distance? Because that would mean the active effect of these devices is actually a cube. Is it 16 blocks measured geometrically? Then its active effect is a sphere. Is it 16 blocks measured with taxicab distance? Then it turns into an octahedron. Clarify your terms, people. I have seen different mods use all three different kinds of measurement interchangeably. For the benefit of people who are wondering, both effects are measured geometrically here. So it's a 16-block radial measure from the center of the device in question, and I just want to place them with an air gap of 9 blocks in each cardinal direction to ensure full coverage of the floor above them. That will no doubt play hell with my OCD, but I will just put them in the cable run, which is that boxy bit under the main floor of my build, so I won't have to look at them and it will be fine. I also don't actually need to light up the roof, for the people who are worried about that. None of the blocks that I built this thing out of count as solid for the purposes of mob spawning, so in theory, mobs should not end up there under normal circumstances. And this is the end result. 8 chunks of convenient, safe-ish building space that don't make my eyes want to explode. The cable run still needs some blocking up, but that can happen whenever I get more cobblestone. My next side project is getting myself a wand. Well, scepter, actually. I can't enchant anything with my current ones because of that iron cap problem. The current materials I have at my disposal will only let me make the lowest tier of wooden wands, but there's no reason that I can't make a scepter and take advantage of the increased capacity anyway. This does mean I have to take a quick trip to the Twilight again to source myself a couple nagas from the old farm, but that's a trivial task. I don't even bother bringing the relocators until I get yanked through a wall by a pinch beetle and then blown up. One moment while I go grab my relocators. Slime beetles are 28 to 30 pixels tall, so I should just need to raise the height of the filter slabs 2 slabs each to allow access, and 3 slabs to block it. And nope, that is not working. One moment, please. I forgot to add the filter on the 3rd stage of the farm. I slapped that sucker in after experiencing terminal stupidity a couple of times, and then the system just works fine. Farming this stuff doesn't take very long. Kobolds have a better drop rate, but my potato brain did not remember this until I had already added the filters for slime beetles, so I just stick it out and it is fine. I only need a few scales anyway. After I finish up with those, I grab the relocators and head back home. With a little bit of thaumium to glue the scale shards together and some more microcrafting, I eventually net myself 1 scepter. I said, I eventually net myself... Oh, never mind. Let me get this XP blob out of here. One moment. There we go. 1 scepter. While in principle, I could enchant all of my armor as it is right now, I don't really want to keep most of it around for any length of time. Diamond armor is just kind of bad in this version. Generally, I prefer to use heavily enchanted Void Thaumaturge armor, but I haven't gone crazy enough to get that yet. This is a super easy fix, fortunately. Rather than permanently warping my brain in new, novel, and interesting patterns, I decide to just make myself a pair of... In addition to this discount, this piece of junk grants me 30 warp when worn, making it a and source of insanity. I foresee no problems with this whatsoever. With my current native warp level at 31, these should put me well over the required level of 50 for major Eldritch Revelations. The Void Thaumaturge set will require a bunch of void metal to make, so I get started on that in the normal and entirely intended way. by dumping a backpack's worth of random garbage into a single crucible and making 2 stacks of void seeds with none of the effort, time, or careful automation that the process would normally require. I also will want to enchant it with all of the incredible modded enchantments that are in this pack, which means it's time to do some more research. Yay! By the time I finish that up, I still have not gotten the proc yet, so I will just let my crazy brew away in the background and go do other things. In this case, other things involve making a whole bunch of open block sprinklers. These fascinating blocks, when fed water, will generate a fairly generous plant growth speed buff in a 9x9 flat area centered on the sprinkler. That effect in and of itself isn't really that fascinating, however. What is fascinating is that this is an excuse to play one of my favorite games. The name of the game is Does It Stack? And I bet you can guess what the rules are. Evidence indicates, yes, it does in fact stack. It looks like I win again. Join me next time on Does It Stack? Or sorry, frame rate, maybe next time. Combine this with some dynamism tablets, and this ends up being a very handy piece of tech. It essentially says to the universe as a whole that I now get a fully automated, infinite supply of any plant that can be grown with bone meal and auto-harvested with a right-click. Pam's ground crops, Natura ground crops, and most vanilla ground crops are now free to produce at a functionally arbitrary rate. For example, peanuts can be used with biofuel production. Well, those are now free and scalably renewable. Biodiesel is no longer a manual process. Now that I have item conduits, it is also well past the time that I upgrade my XP auto-crafting system. Through some careful management of cable priorities, I can set up a system that can craft any 3x3 XP recipe forever, with 0 chance of miscrafts or glitches. Lacking anything else that I care about, I set it to make silver. That should hopefully keep it from overflowing for a little bit. My Eldritch Epiphany has still not popped yet, and at this point I suspect I actually need natural warp to qualify, so I decide to do some careful cherry picking and select a few useful warping researches. This puts me at 60 natural warp, which again should be more than enough to proc the effect. And an hour or so of sitting AFK does end up being enough to get me my Epiphany. Nice. Void armor, here we come. And after another half hour of random microcrafting and enchantments, this is what I get. In addition to offering a substantial improvement in defense and having passive auto-repair functionality, it also has some other utility enchantments that let me do things like see in the dark, deal additional damage when falling, and move substantially faster and more effectively. Plus all of the Thaumcraft passive effects. At this stage of the game, this stuff is absolutely fantastic, and this armor set in particular will most likely last me well into IV. In my current tech level, deeper progression into Thaumcraft very quickly would run into diminishing returns. While there is plenty of things I could do with it, the overwhelming majority of the stuff is only useful in certain niche situations, and a lot of it requires way more setup than is worth. Rather than try to milk more blood out of what is a steadily drying stone, I decide to pivot in another needs-to-happen direction: base modernization. The first step in that process is a weird one: milk production. Thirsty tanks have a glyph that allows them to slowly auto-milk cows that are nearby through a mechanism I dread to contemplate. Talk about warping research, am I right? That, combined with a glyph to output the milk into a larger holding tank, will create a convenient source of Sano essence, which is needed for zinc. Zinc is a key component in filters, which I am going to want for better automation in the future. The tank can only milk each cow once every certain period of time, which is, of course, not given by any of the documentation, but as with all things like this, that problem can be solved by applying more DACA, by which I mean cows. This works fine, but weirdly the forge definition for automagy milk isn't one that allows it to be pulled from another tank, and you have to take it out of a thirsty tank directly. It isn't a big deal, it's just kind of weird. It is, finally, time to move my machine setup. The EBF can be wired up to a single transformer that steps down an amp of MV power to 4 amps of LV, now that I finally got around to making some duct tape, and it gets to live in a special chunk separate from the main base so that it can happily stink itself up without messing with anything else I care about. Biodiesel production, along with all of my other passive stinky systems, will live there, and then I can pipe whatever I need to and from it through the cable run. I've also started assembling the main machine shop into a system that is somewhat more convenient to use. Rather than having everything on one line, each voltage tier has its own separate power supply and cable system, which should hopefully prevent wiring oopsies from detonating my entire base. Again. Moving the biofuel system does mean that I have to manually supply or run a pipe over to the diesel generators on the recycling setup, but I'm willing to accept that time loss for now. The recyclers won't be here forever, after all. With access to item conduits for better sorting and logistics, I can also vastly improve the look and decrease the space footprint of the diesel production system. Instead of a nightmare of piping, it just becomes a simple cable run with some supporting logistics that will magically poop out stinky electric juice. And just like that, stinky electricity juice. All that's left, then, is to pipe it up with the rest of the system. This takes a little bit because I am anal retentive and have to set monodirectionality for every single pipe that I place, but otherwise this goes off without an issue. By sheer coincidence, the 64 tiny pipes that I made are exactly enough to finish it up, too. Some days, you just get it right. For lack of anywhere else to stick it, I also put the obsidian system over near the EBF. I don't really trust it fully, but it has been remarkably non-explosive thus far, so I'm willing to give it a chance. It is now time for a status update on the Sapphire situation. We are 2/3 of the way there. It's starting to look like olivine is then going to be the deciding factor in which I uninstall my system, and in addition to all of that, I have just heaping chests of other stuff of varying levels of use. I also decide I will run the recyclers off of my old Steam setup for now. I have enough cable to wire it, and it's rated at 4 amps of LV, so I can just directly swap it out for the combustion engines that I'm using currently. My recyclers are running slightly under capacity, because apparently the watercrafter is just a little bit less than 32 items a second. So there's also enough spare power to run the packager as well, which lets me eliminate more extraneous machinery. The way the system is designed now also means that if my scrap box barrel overflows, it will start recycling scrap into more scrap, which isn't ideal, but it is kind of funny. This stuff is free, and the losses are basically non-existent compared to the scale of the project, so I don't ever bother fixing this. Other fun projects include re-automating solar silicon production. I'm gonna need more bouilles at some point after all, and this stuff likes to take its time. When moving over my storage area, I end up having to break out the admin commands. One of my Railcraft track items caused the game to crash when I threw it on the ground. I was able to world edit out that crashing item, but rather than risk the game breaking again, I just decided to use game mode to delete the rest of the tracks from my inventory directly. It's better to be safe than sorry. My next random project is cooking. Specifically, eating one of every food item that I can possibly make, because eating novel foods offer me both research points for Thaumcraft and will increase my maximum HP. As with many of my projects, this is something that will just continue on in the background as I have free time. It doesn't really warrant all that much attention, and you're gonna very easily be able to see the progress by looking at the bottom of my screen. My approach to this is to just make a huge mountain of every ingredient at my disposal, throw it in a fridge attached to the Cooking for Blockheads table, and then as I eat everything that uses a specific ingredient, I will just remove it and throw it away. It's nothing fancy, it's just a free permanent health buff. In my infinite wisdom, I decided that I wanted to try stacking up all of the materials I would need to make 2 stacks of HV circuits. This ends up taking a significant amount of time, and for entirely unrelated reasons, one of my other projects during that time is to make a silverwood smoking pipe and get myself absolutely plastered. For science, of course. Relaxing tobacco from thermic bases, when smoked with a silverwood pipe from the same mod, has a very low chance of reducing normal warp. Since I can't make soap yet and have nothing better to do with my time than get absolutely hammered, this seems like a valuable usage of my life. I am personally of the opinion that any warp removing effects from doing this are probably accidental and instead come from the memory loss and crippling brain damage caused by smoking a stack of tobacco, rather than any curative effect native to the plant itself. But I'm also not a thaumaturge, so I can't say. Other fun projects include super tanks. These suckers hold 4,000 buckets of fluid, which might be enough to store a small fraction of the amount of oxygen that I'm going to need in the near future. That electrolyzer is not going to be turning off for a good long while. Since I'm mostly waiting on machine processing right now, I decide to farm my warp down a bit and eat some new foods. Naturally, I decide the most optimal way to do this is to run around spamming jump to reduce my hunger, bashing my head into a ceiling, and smoking a pipe. This also means that, for a brief, shining moment, my technological progression requires me to run around like a lunatic, causing myself intense cranial trauma, all while alternating between taking a fat rip and cramming my face with food. Gregtech has officially made being a couch potato an inevitable part of technological progression. How unbelievably validating. It's time for more gallium arsenide. This is trivial to do, but still oddly satisfying to watch. Hey kids, it's time to do some alchemy, exactly the way Azinor intended, with no weirdness or exploits whatsoever. I was originally going to precisely calculate out how much of each component I would need to make my 2 stacks of HV circuits, and then do an amazing, wow, cool reveal about how much junk it was. Then, I actually did the math and realized that I couldn't be bothered with counting, so I just made yes please quantities of everything. Case in point, here's an entire barrel of resistors. To cut chips, I need an MV lathe, which needs a cobalt brass gearhead. Remember when I had to make an entire essence berry farm specifically dedicated to the task of producing XP for one of these things? Wow, the times have changed. Making this doesn't even meaningfully slow down my production speed anymore. We are quickly approaching the point where I will be ready to proceed to HV. I'm up to 8 green sapphires now. Literally, any loot box now could be my ticket out of here. And then immediately after that, on the next round, I get my last sapphire within the first stack of boxes. If you look carefully, you can actually see the item floating before I pick it up. RNGesus truly wills it. This doesn't mean that my recycler setup is going away, however. I still need olivine for an olivine block for reasons. But it isn't going to be needed for a bit, so that will happen on its own time. That sucker gets compressed, cut, and lathed until I am finally left with the product of 3.2 million-ish junk items. 1 green sapphire lens. Regardless of my circuit situation, I am able to upgrade my EBF with MV tier energy hatches now, quadrupling its energy throughput and unlocking a whole new bevy of resources. LV tier EBF, you serve me well. And will continue to do so, because I actually just made a second EBF. Why would anyone make only one, right? Additional energy with this multi-block also allows for faster resource production. I can now produce steel ingots in a whopping 2.5 seconds. If steel was a problem before, it certainly isn't going to be one now. The observant among you might have observed a problem at this point. I can smelt stainless steel and have ready access to healthy amounts of iron and nickel, but where am I going to get chrome and manganese from? Chrome, thankfully, is easy. By getting an ingot of it from ruby dust, I can then replicate it using the usual Thaumcraft nonsense. Manganese is the issue. Thaumcraft replication of it requires nibrucium, which is an extremely difficult to locate and functionally impossible to produce essence type. For now, at least, I will have to produce it legitimately. Somehow. Small amounts of it can be extracted from red garnet dust, which I do have, but it is a very small amount, and I cannot reliably produce red garnet dust at scale, yet. Bees, as always, offer a theoretical solution, but bees. Right now, my only hope of scalable production that won't take a small eternity to access is then with Garnetia crops. These need blocks of garnet to mature, which means I need an implosion compressor to turn my garnet dusts into garnet gems. Thankfully, that is only a small matter of microcrafting and time. I had to make the circuits anyway, after all. This machine needs explosives to function, as the name implies. I could make nitroglycerin using my biodiesel setup, but nitric acid, no thank you. Instead, I will just use an unnecessary amount of powder barrels. Gunpowder and string is free, and Gregtech wood planks are about as cheap as they come. I go grab all of my garnet, slap a stack in, and wow, okay, this thing uses a lot of powder barrels. Holy cow. And also it stinks. A lot. I can see that I'm going to need to explore other automation opportunities in my future, then. Regardless of their stinky and dubiously moral origins, I now have garnet blocks. Now, I just need to mention the one teensy little important fact that I don't actually have Garnetia seeds yet. I actually thought that I did, but apparently not. It is a tier 7 crop, and likes to be bred from other metal and crystal themed crops, so it will probably take a little while before I get any. I settle for building a nice new crossbreeding area and then slamming down all of my highest tier crops into it. It's fine, it totally isn't like my tech progression is 100% dependent on these things or anything. Take your time. I decide to take a break from farming and do something completely different. Dynamism tablets and scrap boxes have really weird interactions. The tablet on its own can't open them. When it's instructed to right-click them, it just won't do anything. If it right-clicks on an interactable block or entity, like a chest or a villager, it will perform the clicking action, but the box won't be opened, presumably because it's trying to right-click on the thing with a loot box. To use them together and actually open the loot boxes, the tablet has to right-click on something that isn't interactable, like a torch, a solid block of cobblestone, a pig, another dropped item, but it will function. It is, however, definitely a mechanic to add to the jank bank. Anyway, the end result of this weird mechanic is a machine that, through the power of Thromcraft, will open scrap boxes, filter out scrap, garbage, and wooden tools, which are like 70% of the drops from these things, and then store the rest of the usable stuff for my perusal later. Bingo. Got it. And immediately after, I got a second one. Despite having gotten these, I am certainly not out of the woods yet. Just because I have Garnetia samples does not mean that the process of mass-producing garnet is going to magically appear out of thin air. I take the time to plant my stockpile of random metal-producing plants in one of my more free farm plots. There is a quest that requires their products to progress, and I do want that out of the way so I can get access to some of the more interesting stuff down the line. Garnet production will just slowly scale itself up as I get more breedable samples growing, and then that will allow me to start the long and painful process of producing stainless steel. All of this, however, will have to wait until the next episode. Thank you for your time. All of the usual channel promotional nonsense is down below if you are inclined, and I hope you enjoyed.